Unitatea, care se află la doar 500 de kilometri distanță de Cernobîl, funcționează totuși cu o tehnologie diferită, e proiectată să reziste unei explozii puternice, dar experții se întreabă cât ar rezista unui bombardament în cazul în care s-ar pune problema de ceva constant. Care sunt punctele nevralgice la Zaporojie și ce riscuri sunt acolo? Aflăm chiar acum dintr-un interviu în exclusivitate cu un doctor în fizică nucleară. Este cercetător al King's College din Londra, Dr. Ross Peel.
Help us please understand the timeline of such an event. In the worst case scenario, what would be the timeline from, let's say, the disconnecting of the nuclear plant from the Ukrainian grid?
So if there is a disconnection from the grid, the plants will immediately shut themselves down, and then we will go to a use of diesel generators to maintain those safety functions. Now, Zaporojie has two types of diesel generators. The first are the very large static ones that run for 7 days without refueling. These ones are slightly older, and there are some questions around whether they are in full working order or whether they might need some maintenance and so on. The others are smaller mobile generators that were brought in since Fukushima as a result of lessons learned there. Those can run for just a few hours without refueling. Now, as long as there is somebody there to keep putting diesel into these generators, then everything should be maintained in safe condition. In a worst case scenario, where those diesel generators are unavailable or destroyed, or no one is providing fuel to them, at the point where we lose that ability to provide power, then the fuel in the reactors could overheat within a matter of perhaps 1 to 2 hours and start to, for instance, melt. Now, that would then potentially do things like damage the reactor vessel. It could cause the radioactive materials to escape into the building that the reactor is in. Now, that building is designed to it's designed to contain that. It's actually called a containment building, and it's meant to withstand any explosive forces from within and a lot of damage from without in order to prevent the release of radioactive materials. So already we have a number of different things that have to happen for that worst case to occur. And then the final one would be something that breaches the containment building. So this would be an explosion beyond what we have ever foreseen, and that is unlikely. Or it would be as a result of damage from the outside by shelling or missile strikes onto these buildings. And it would have to be a strong, powerful, deliberate attack, really, in order to breach through. These buildings are not fragile, they're very strong.
In the case of a nuclear accident, what are the substances that would be released into the atmosphere, and for how long could they contaminate the air or the soil?
The mixture of nuclear material inside of a nuclear reactor or in used fuel after it's been through the reactor is effectively the entirety of the periodic table. It's more or less every element, with a few exceptions, obviously. And for each element, there are a number of different forms. So there are hundreds and hundreds of different components within that material, all of which have a different level of radioactivity, all of which have a different amount within the fuel, all of which have a different length of time that they are dangerous for, to explain it in simple terms. So it's a real mixture of different things. The material itself, some of it will become safe within a matter of minutes and days. Some of it persists for many, many, many years. What we'd be looking at is the danger of that material, if it were released, to spread out from where it was released from over an area. And the area it spreads over is determined by things like primarily the weather conditions. So if there's strong wind blowing in a certain direction, then naturally that very fine dust, because that's the form it will take, and some gases, will be carried over by the wind in a certain direction, spreading out kind of in a cone shape from its point of release with the wind. Naturally, the areas closest to the plant and those in the center of that cone will likely be the worst affected, those further away or closer to the edges of the cone will be less affected. This is all what we call plume, P-L-U-M-E, the plume of radioactive materials, and actually modeling the plume and determining where it will go is a very difficult task and not something I myself am an expert in.
After the Chernobyl nuclear accident, the Soviet Union organized at the time a big operation to contain the damages. Who could intervene now, given the fact that it happens in the middle of a war?
So in terms of a Chernobyl liquidator type response to Zaporojie, it would be a very difficult situation and a very different situation. Ukraine's resources and Russia's resources at the front line of this conflict are not in a position to divert easily from their current activities and conflict efforts and so on into containing a disaster like this. And I would be very concerned about how such a disaster could be managed. It would be largely down to the individual countries under that plume as it moved, under that cloud of radioactive material to respond in their own way. At the site itself, it would depend on who was in control of it and how they responded. It might be that Russian forces, if this plant were to be damaged in such a way as there's a large-scale release of radioactivity, who knows if they would stay to respond to that or if they would withdraw and leave Ukraine to figure out how to manage the situation.